Aaliyah Monroe awoke before dawn, as she did every morning, to the sound of Baltimore stirring outside her bedroom window. At 18, she was no stranger to early starts. Her mother's double shift at the hospital meant Aaliyah shouldered breakfast preparations and helped her younger brother Marcus gather his school supplies. Yet this morning, as she slid into her well-worn sneakers and smoothed the crease in her blazer, her heart fluttered with anticipation rather than routine. Today was the day she would face the scholarship interview that could change everything. Her dreams were vivid. A campus of Gothic spires and sunlit quads at Preston University, where she would study political science, debate alongside peers who looked beyond her skin, and emerge ready to dismantle the very barriers that had challenged her. The Kavanaugh Foundation's full-ride scholarship, covering tuition, room, and board, and a living stipend, was her ticket. Founded by William Kavanaugh, a billionaire philanthropist renowned for supporting promising young leaders, the foundation was as competitive as it was generous. For Aaliyah, it represented more than financial relief. It stood for recognition of her intellect and her voice. After dropping Marcus at the bus stop, she paused on the front steps and closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of confidence she'd cultivated through years of academic success and community service. Her guidance counselor, Ms. Reynard, had practiced mock interviews with her until Aaliyah could recite her achievements in her sleep. Valedictorian, founder of the Black Youth Leadership Club, volunteer tutor at the local library. But it was her essay, written by candlelight, every word honed until it glowed with conviction, that she considered her true strength. In its pages, she had laid bare her experiences of systemic bias, chronicled her mother's sacrifices, and proclaimed her determination to transform educational equity. The Preston University Alumni Center, where the interview was held, smelled of polished mahogany and freshly brewed coffee. Aaliyah's palms were steady as she signed in, but her breath hitched when she glimpsed the selection committee through the observation window. 5 suited figures seated behind a long oak table, each reviewing a thick dossier. She set her shoulders and walked in. "Ms. Monroe, welcome," said Dr. Hastings, a steely-eyed dean whose name she recognized from last year's Foundation report. "We've heard remarkable things." The interview began with cordial pleasantries, her grades, extracurriculars, long-term goals. She spoke clearly, confidently, even smiled when she described the impact she'd made as a mentor to elementary students. But when questions shifted to her leadership style, asking about moments of conflict, she answered honestly. Yes, she had confronted a teacher over discriminatory grading policies. Yes, she had organized protests when textbooks lacked diverse authors. She stood firm, unapologetic, refusing to mince words. Later, in the hallway, she replayed that exchange. Had she been too emotional? Too aggressive? Her pulse quickened at the thought. She wanted to change the world, but perhaps they wanted a more manageable champion. Still, she reminded herself that authenticity was her greatest asset. 2 days later, a crisp envelope arrived. Aaliyah sat at the kitchen table, fingers trembling as she slid it open. Inside lay a single page, typewritten and formal. "Dear Ms. Monroe, we commend your exceptional academic record and leadership potential. However, after careful consideration, we regret to inform you that your application will not be advanced. While your intellect is evident, your demeanor, described by the committee as overly assertive and emotionally driven, is not aligned with the image we seek to cultivate among our scholars. We wish you success in your future endeavors." Her mother, entering with mugs of cocoa, gasped. Marcus peered over her shoulder, eyes wide. The words, overly assertive and not aligned, echoed in Aaliyah's mind like a cruel mantra. She blinked back tears, refusing to let them spill, not here, not in front of them. But when she finally looked up, her mother's hand covered hers, warm and comforting. "It's not a reflection of your worth," her mother said softly. "It's theirs." Word spread quickly. The vice principal called Aaliyah into his office, concern creasing his forehead. "What they said was unacceptable," he declared quietly, sliding a letter of recommendation across the desk. "Let me know if there's anything I can do." Teachers, Mr. Chen from Calculus, Ms. Ortiz from English, sent encouraging notes, vowing to lobby the foundation. Even the school newspaper ran an editorial. "Monroe's courage, our shame." Aaliyah's classmates, too, were vocal. Hashtags trended on social media. Yet none of it could erase the sting of rejection. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She felt exhausted, drained of the energy she devoted to hope. But somewhere in the darkness, a spark endured. She recalled her grandmother's words. "They can close one door, my child, but they can't lock all the windows." Taking out her laptop, she opened her essay file and reread the lines she'd poured her soul into. The rhetoric about generations of inequity, the narrative of her mother's relentless toil, her own vow to disrupt complacency in education, all of it still rang true. In the stillness, Aaliyah whispered to herself, "This isn't over." She hit save, then closed the laptop. She would need to regroup, to find another way in. But first, she allowed herself a moment to grieve the opportunity she believed slipped through her fingers. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, in the gleaming offices of the Kavanaugh Foundation headquarters, an overworked assistant named Maribel sifted through the day's mail and digital submissions. Files were tagged, approved, pending, unapproved. Aaliyah's dossier, complete with her powerful essay, rested in the latter category, deemed too challenging for the Foundation's traditionally conservative public image. Maribel frowned at the folder label. She clicked it open, intending to delete the essay and move on. But the very first words on the page halted her. "I write not as a victim, but as an heir to a promise unfulfilled." Her eyes traced the paragraphs, each line more compelling than the last. She leaned forward, captivated by Aaliyah's vivid portrayal of her mother's sacrifices and her own relentless pursuit of justice. The room around her hushed, as though the essay demanded solitary attention. Maribel scrolled to the final sentence. "If we are to claim our rightful place in the halls of learning, we must challenge the very foundations that excluded our voices." The assistant exhaled, unsettled. This was no ordinary application. She saved a copy, marking it for Mr. Kavanaugh's review. In a penthouse overlooking the city, William Kavanaugh, aged 55, had just concluded a late dinner. He hovered over the leather-bound volume of a biography he'd been reading, burdened by the weight of expectations that came with his name. Though he prided himself on his philanthropic legacy, lately he'd sensed the Foundation's programming favoring low-profile candidates, safe choices that fit a sanitized narrative. He clicked off the light on the reading lamp and prepared to retire, unaware of the file awaiting his assistant's intervention. Before drifting into sleep, he murmured, "Tomorrow I must re-examine our process." It was a vague resolution, born of midlife disquiet rather than conviction. Yet unbeknownst to him, destiny was already nudging at that door. The next morning Maribel tapped on his office door. "Mr. Kavanaugh, there's an essay I think you should see. It was categorized as unapproved, but—" He looked up, brows arching. "Show me." Within minutes, he held Aaliyah's words in his hands. He read by the broad window light, each paragraph stirring something he hadn't felt in years, righteous indignation. As he reached the conclusion, a single tear traced his cheek. "How did this slip through?" he whispered. Moments later, summonses were dispatched. The Foundation's executive board convened, tense and unprepared for William's blunt question. Why did we reject a student who demands nothing more than equality? One by one, managers offered rehearsed defenses, brand consistency, public perception, donor preferences. He listened, chest tightening. Then he spoke, voice low but unwavering. "If our image depends on whiteness and obedience, I'm ashamed my name adorns these walls." Back in Baltimore, Aaliyah arrived at school hoping for solace and found unexpected motion. She passed clusters of students huddled around screens, their murmurs growing into cheers. On one monitor, a video played. William Kavanaugh, standing at a podium, cleared his throat. "Today, I recognize my mistake," he declared, eyes glimmering with remorse and resolve. "We extend to Aaliyah Monroe our full scholarship, campus housing, and an internship at the Foundation. Her truth demanded to be heard, and I failed her." Aaliyah's jaw dropped. Her mother stifled a sob. Teachers embraced her. As she watched the video, her chest tightened with gratitude, pride, and a new sense of purpose. The disappointment of days before melted into determination. This opportunity was not just for her, but for every student whose voice had been muted by institutional bias. When the crowd outside the school erupted into applause, Aaliyah felt a surge of something fierce and beautiful, the power of authentic narrative to transform reality. She closed her eyes, imagining the steps ahead, a campus lecture hall, late-night strategy sessions for educational reform, the faces of young girls waiting for their own chance. In that moment, she knew her journey had only just begun. And as the spring sun slid across the sky, warming the brick facade of her high school, Aaliyah Monroe stood poised to become more than a scholarship recipient. She would be a catalyst for change, bold, brilliant, and unapologetically herself. Aaliyah Monroe awoke the next morning to a barrage of notifications on her phone. Friend requests, messages, tags and posts celebrating her scholarship reversal. The video of William Kavanaugh's public apology had gone viral overnight, amassing millions of views and inspiring headlines from Baltimore to Boston to Bangkok. Yet, amid the whirlwind of excitement, she felt an undercurrent of something deeper: responsibility. Her victory was no longer a private triumph. It was the spark that had ignited a broader conversation about fairness and representation in higher education. She slid out of bed and padded across her modest bedroom to where her mother's laptop lay open on the desk. On the screen, the Kavanaugh Foundation's website had been updated. Alongside glowing photos of past scholars, a featured banner proclaimed, "Welcome Scholar Aaliyah Monroe, Champion for Change." Below it, her essay, once buried in a folder labeled "Unapproved," now shown in full view for any visitor to read. Comments poured in. Fellow students, parents, educators, even celebrities applauding her courage. Aaliyah scrolled, her chest swelling with gratitude and trepidation. This visibility was unprecedented. With it came both influence and scrutiny. Downstairs, her mother was already dressed for work, donning her crisp nurse's uniform. She paused her hairbrush and regarded Aaliyah with a mixture of pride and concern. "Ready for your first day as the face of reform," she teased, but her eyes softened. "Remember to take care of yourself. Today is only the beginning." Aaliyah nodded. "I will. I want to make sure I say the right things." She slipped her laptop into her backpack, along with her well-organized binder of notes, speech drafts, talking points, research on scholarship demographics. She had spent the early hours refining a statement she would deliver at a press conference later that afternoon, hosted by the Foundation in partnership with the school district. The ride to school was surreal. At every corner, news vans idled with satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters clustered outside the entrance, microphones at the ready. Students streamed past with their faces aglow, snapping photos and filming TikTok reactions. Marcus, who usually grumbled on the bus, nudged her with excited eyes. "You're practically a rock star," he whispered, beaming. In the auditorium, a makeshift stage stood beneath a banner, reading "Equity in Education," a conversation with Aaliyah Monroe and William Kavanaugh. School administrators hurried about, setting up sound equipment and arranging chairs for a crowd that already overflowed into the aisles. Aaliyah's guidance counselor, Ms. Reynard, found her in the wings, adjusting her comms earpiece. "Deep breaths," she murmured. "Remember, you're not alone up there." Moments later, William Kavanaugh stepped onto the stage, his presence both commanding and genuine. Gone was the polished reserve she'd only ever seen in corporate videos. Here stood a man humbled by the power of her words. He nodded to the audience, then to her, offering an encouraging smile. Reporters ceased their murmurs. "Thank you all for joining us today," he began, voice carrying across the hall. "We are here not just to celebrate one student, but to challenge the systems that allowed a brilliant young woman to be overlooked because of an outdated image of what a scholar should be." Applause rippled through the room. He gestured to Aaliyah. "And now I invite Aaliyah Monroe to share her story and her vision for an inclusive future." Aaliyah stepped forward, heart pounding but determined. The sea of faces blurred into a tide of support. Teachers nodding, classmates leaning in, local dignitaries scribbling notes. She raised her chin and spoke. "I stand here today not as an exception, but as evidence of what happens when we listen. My journey began in classrooms where textbooks ignored my history, and in scholarship interviews where my passion was mistaken for aggression. But passion is not a flaw. It is the fire that drives change. Education should not demand silence from those with the loudest truths to tell. It should welcome every voice, especially those shaped by struggle." She paused, letting her words land. Flashbulbs popped. Kavanaugh looked on with pride. "In my mother's hands, I held textbooks she could not afford to buy. In my mother's exhaustion, I saw the price of inequality. She worked 3 jobs so I could work toward this stage. And today, I pledge to honor her sacrifice by lifting up others who carry similar burdens. We will rewrite the narrative from one of exclusion to one of empowerment. The applause was thunderous. Reporters clamored to ask questions, but the conversation shifted quickly from her personal story to her proposed initiatives. She outlined 3 concrete goals. First, partnering with community organizations to identify marginalized students early and offer mentorship. Second, advocating for need-blind admissions policies paired with support systems. Third, establishing a student-led advisory council at the foundation to ensure diverse perspectives inform scholarship criteria. After the Q&A, she slipped off stage to join Kavanaugh backstage, where the Foundation's first official task force on educational equity awaited its inaugural meeting, comprised of faculty members, alumni, and student representatives. The task force had been convened in direct response to her challenge. She took a seat next to Kavanaugh and watched as he opened a sleek binder titled Equity Action Plan. He leaned toward her. "Your ideas are already reshaping our agenda," he whispered. "Tell me, what should our first move be?" She offered a suggestion drawn from her own experience, a pilot program beginning in inner-city high schools like hers, pairing scholarship candidates with peer mentors and workshop series on application strategies, personal branding, and handling bias. Kavanaugh scribbled notes. "I love it," he said. By evening, the auditorium had emptied, but the reverberations of the day lingered. Aaliyah lingered for a moment, watching the empty stage, the room that had witnessed the birth of a movement. She felt both exhilarated and humbled. The weight of expectations pressed gently yet insistently on her shoulders. Back at home, she found her mother waiting up with dinner: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, cornbread. Marcus hovered, eyes bright. They traded stories, his latest math quiz. He'd aced it, as usual. Her experiences meeting new Foundation members, the smiles she'd seen on students' faces. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You were incredible," she said. "But promise me you'll rest tomorrow." Aaliyah smiled tiredly. "I'll try, but tomorrow I have a meeting with the school board, and we have to set up those mentorship sessions." She raised her fork. To new beginnings. Over the next week, Aaliyah's world expanded at a dizzying pace. She conducted interviews with national education journals, appeared on a local radio show, and even recorded a segment for a morning news program. Each appearance reinforced her message. Inequality in education was not a distant problem. It was a daily reality for students in communities like hers. Yet amid the media whirlwind, she remained tethered to her roots. Every afternoon, she returned to her old routine: tutoring at the library, leading club meetings via Zoom, grading essays from younger students eager for feedback. Her first home visit, accompanying Kavanaugh to her own neighborhood high school, was particularly poignant. As they toured drab hallways and cramped classrooms, she pointed out strengths: dedicated teachers, a vibrant art program, and challenges: aging textbooks, limited counselor availability. Kavanaugh listened intently, stopping occasionally to ask detailed questions. In the guidance office, they met with Ms. Reynolds, who recounted stories of students losing hope after repeated rejections. With her voice steady, Aaliyah proposed allocating foundation funds to bolster counseling services and provide small grants for school supplies. That evening, in his study overlooking the city skyline, Kavanaugh drafted the initiative. The Monroe Grants for Student Success, an annual fund to support programs recommended by students and educators alike. Aaliyah read the proposal, her eyes misting at the possibilities. Art supplies for a budding painter, new lab equipment for a science club, honorariums for community speakers. "This could change lives," she whispered. He nodded, his gaze warm. "Because you changed mine." In parallel, whispers of the Monroe effect began to circulate among students nationwide. High school clubs invited her to speak via live stream. Nonprofits sought her endorsement. Even college admissions officers mentioned her work during campus visits. But Aaliyah guarded herself against overcommitment. She declined some invitations politely, ensuring she had time to lead the task force effectively and maintain her academic workload as she prepared to enroll at Preston University that fall. Late one night, hunched over her kitchen table, she penned an op-ed for a national newspaper. She wrote of her rejection, her vindication, and her vision, concluding with a call to action. If institutions are to stand for learning, they must learn to stand for every learner. The piece was published with an editorial header, "By Scholarship. Winner, Aaliyah Monroe." Within hours, the online edition garnered thousands of comments, many professing solidarity, others critical of her radical approach. She welcomed the debate. To her, it signified that her message had pierced the surface. 2 weeks later, the Task Force on Educational Equity met again, this time in person at Foundation headquarters. Aaliyah sat at the head of a long conference table, flanked by Kavanaugh and Ms. Reynard, whom she'd invited as a mentor. Around them, school principals, student ambassadors, and philanthropy experts exchanged data, proposed timelines, and allocated budgets. When someone suggested delaying the mentorship pilot until the following school year, Aaliyah spoke up. "Our students don't have the luxury of waiting. If even one child falls through the cracks this year, we've failed." Her conviction was met with nods. The pilot was greenlit for immediate rollout. As the meeting adjourned, Kavanaugh whispered, "You're as formidable as they said you were." She laughed, the tension easing from her shoulders. "I learned from the best," she replied, and though he winced at her jest, aware of the best that had once nearly deemed her too emotional, he recognized her point. Transformation often began with discomfort. That evening, Aaliyah gathered with her family for a rare night off. They watched a movie, played board games, and shared a meal without monitors or microphones. Marcus dozed mid-game, head against her shoulder. Her mother stroked her hair as she drifted off, murmuring, "My brave girl." Later, alone on her bedroom balcony, Aaliyah gazed at the city lights. She thought of the students who would soon join the mentorship program, the community centers awaiting grants, the young women watching her speech online, and daring to imagine themselves in her place. A gentle breeze carried the distant hum of traffic and possibility. Her phone buzzed, a message from Kavanaugh. "Draft of the grant guidelines is ready for your review. Also, lunch with the board tomorrow?" She typed back, "On it. Thanks for believing in me." Then she set the phone aside. Staring into the night, she reflected on how quickly a single essay had altered her trajectory, and, possibly, the trajectories of countless others. The path forward was fraught with challenges, institutional inertia, skeptics who doubted student-led change, the relentless demands on her time. Yet she felt ready. The scholarship that had almost slipped away had taught her resilience. The foundation's reversal had taught her accountability. Her mother's sacrifices had taught her gratitude. Most of all, she understood this. True transformation began not with grand pronouncements, but with acts of listening and partnership. And as she prepared to lead the charge for equity, she would carry that lesson into every boardroom, every classroom, and every heart she had yet to reach. Aaliyah smiled, turned from the balcony, and flicked off the light. Tomorrow, the work would continue, and she would be there, unwavering, to see it through. The following autumn, Preston University's campus came alive with crisp leaves and eager new students, but none were greeted with quite as much fanfare as Aaliyah Monroe. On move-in day, she arrived at the grand brick quad beneath an archway draped in golden ivy, her luggage stacked on a trolley, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and solemn purpose. Behind her, William Kavanaugh rode in a black SUV, determined to help his newest scholar settle into her dorm, but more importantly, to stand beside her as she embarked on the next stage of their shared mission. Inside her residence hall, Aaliyah met her roommate, Zoe Kim, a soft-spoken, aspiring novelist from Seattle, who had won a humanities scholarship and admired Aaliyah's activism from afar. Their initial conversation crackled with warmth and curiosity, two different voices finding harmony. "Your story inspired me," Zoe said, unpacking her stack of novels. "I want to craft characters who speak truths like you do." Aaliyah smiled, unpacking her binders of policy briefs and flyers. "And I want to learn to tell stories with your finesse. Together, we could do incredible things." By the time Kavanaugh arrived, armed with boxes of textbooks and a care package from home, the two had debated the merits of narrative versus data in advocacy. He set down a basket of gourmet snacks and high-thread linens, then caught Aaliyah's eye. "How's my scholar doing?" "Ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of new faces and responsibilities swirling around her. "Thank you for coming." In the weeks that followed, Aaliyah settled into an extraordinary dual life, rigorous coursework in political science, punctuated by late-night study sessions in the library, and tireless work co-chairing the Foundation's national initiative, Bold and Brilliant, which she had envisioned that summer. The program awarded scholarships and mentorship to girls from underrepresented schools, just as she herself had once yearned for support. Under her leadership, the first cohort of 20 young women began their own preparatory workshops, attending virtual lectures led by Preston faculty and participating in mock interviews hosted by alumni. Aaliyah's mornings began with lectures on constitutional law and social movements, her afternoons with meetings in Kavanaugh's Manhattan office where they refined grant applications, commissioned research on admissions equity, and negotiated partnerships with community centers. Evenings were devoted to the student-led advisory council she had established at the Foundation. Each council meeting brimmed with earnest discussion: how to measure program impact, how to address pushback from traditional donors, and how to amplify participants' voices in public forums. By mid-October, the Bold and Brilliant pilot had already shown promising results. In Detroit, a high school junior named Nia Johnson, reported that the mentorship helped her craft a compelling personal statement, securing early acceptance to 3 selective colleges. In rural Alabama, participants formed a peer support network that raised funds for transportation to campus interviews. These stories galvanized the Foundation's board, and Kavanaugh, once cautious about large-scale change, found himself advocating for massive investment. One Friday, Aaliyah received an invitation to speak at the National Conference on Education Reform in Washington, D.C. It was the largest gathering of policymakers, philanthropists, and activists in the country, an arena she had once believed too exclusive and too distant. Now, as an invited keynote speaker, she would stand on a stage alongside senators, deans, and renowned scholars. On the morning of her address, she stood backstage in a white blazer, chosen for its crisp professionalism, and closed her eyes, recalling the earliest auditions of her voice in middle school talent shows. Then she thought of her mother, pulling double shifts in the hospital, and of Zoe, who had stayed up late proofreading her speech. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonant and calm. "I stand before you not as an exception, but as proof that when opportunity meets preparation, transformation follows. 3 years ago, I was told my passion was too aggressive for the scholarships I sought. Today, I return to these hallowed halls not merely as a student, but as a champion for those whose voices have been minimized." She narrated the journey, her rejection, Kavanaugh's reversal, the birth of Bold and Brilliant, and the triumphs of its inaugural cohort. She wove in hard data, acceptance rates rising by 15%, retention of first-generation students increasing by 20%, and heartfelt anecdotes. A girl in Iowa who wrote her first college essay by flashlight when the power went out. A boy in Miami whose sister, inspired by Bold and Brilliant's ethos, decided to pursue law. Each example underscored her core thesis: equity in education requires both systemic reform and individual advocacy. The audience erupted in applause as she concluded, "Let us commit here and now to dismantle barriers not tomorrow, but today. For every student silenced by doubt, there must be a mentor to amplify their truth. For every policy that entrenches inequality, there must be a coalition to rewrite it." This is how we honor our collective promise to future generations. That afternoon, lifelong journalists approached her with requests for follow-up interviews. Legislators invited her to join advisory panels. Deans extended offers to speak at convocations. Yet Aaliyah remained grounded, politely scheduling meetings for the next week and declining invitations that would distract from her coursework or her responsibilities at the Foundation. Back on campus, midterm exams loomed, and she balanced her papers on voter turnout and racial disparities with grant proposals and program evaluations. The pressure intensified when a major donor questioned the scalability of Bold and Brilliant, arguing that smaller local initiatives were more manageable than a national scholarship network. Aaliyah prepared for the meeting with the donor, gathering testimonials from participants, projected budget forecasts, and a strategic plan displaying multi-year impact metrics. In the glass-walled conference room overlooking the Charles River, she presented her case with calm authority. She showed video clips of mentees like Nia delivering their own pitches, slides of community partners expressing gratitude, and charts demonstrating steady growth in scholarship applications from marginalized schools. The donor, an austere businessman with steel-rimmed glasses, asked probing questions about cost management and oversight. She answered each one with data and empathy, underscoring that accountability and vision were not mutually exclusive. When she finished, the room fell silent. The donor's steely gaze softened. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "you remind me that change is never simple, but always necessary. Consider my previous reservations withdrawn. You have my support and my resources." Leaving the building, Aaliyah exhaled a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Each victory felt like a testament to those early mornings in Baltimore when she first dared to believe in herself. Yet she also recognized the road ahead, sustaining momentum, navigating skepticism, and ensuring that every scholarship meant more than a check. It meant a community of support. That winter, as snow blanketed the quad and students huddled in libraries, Aaliyah turned her attention inward, revisiting her political science thesis on affirmative action, tutoring underclassmen in the resident halls, and attending weekly therapy sessions to process the whirlwind of obligations and emotions. She understood that leadership demanded self-care as much as steadfastness. Meanwhile, Bold and Brilliant's fellows convened for their first in-person summit on campus. 20 young women arrived at Preston, each carrying a suitcase and a spark of hope. Aaliyah greeted them at the auditorium steps, wearing a warm smile and a simple lapel pin, a gold quill on a field of black, to symbolize the power of writing one's own story. In her opening remarks, she urged them to embrace vulnerability and ambition in equal measure. You are here because you believed in yourselves even when the odds were stacked against you. This community exists to remind you that you are brilliant and bold every single day. Lean on each other, challenge one another, and together let us redefine what it means to be a scholar. Over the next 2 days, the summit buzzed with energy. Panels on leadership development, workshops on financial literacy, and breakout sessions, where fellows drafted policy proposals for their home districts. Aaliyah circulated among the groups, offering guidance, listening to frustrations, and celebrating breakthroughs. As she watched one participant, a shy junior from Detroit named Maya Jackson, present her plan for a school-based advocacy club, she felt a swell of pride. The movement she had ignited was now blazing with new leaders of its own. On the summit's final night, the fellows gathered in a candlelit hall for a storytelling circle. Each took a turn sharing their experiences, the obstacles they had overcome, the dreams they still held, the reasons they refused to be silenced. When it came to Aaliyah's turn, she recounted a final piece of feedback she had received after her initial rejection. "You're too outspoken." Then she paused, voice catching. "But today I stand before you, outspoken, unbowed, and unstoppable. If my truth makes them uncomfortable, then so be it, because change has never come from silence." Tears glistened in the fellows' eyes as they rose to their feet, enveloping her in applause and embrace. In that moment, Aaliyah felt the full circle of her journey, from a single essay buried in a rejected folder to a national movement that would ripple through generations. Spring arrived at Preston with a flush of cherry blossoms and the promise of commencement. For Aaliyah, it signified more than the end of her freshman year. It marked the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. At the annual Foundation Gala in New York City, she and Kavanaugh stood side by side on the podium, honoring the second cohort of bold and brilliant scholars and announcing an endowment that would secure the program's future indefinitely. As the room of philanthropists and dignitaries rose in ovation, Aaliyah's gaze swept across the audience to find her mother and Marcus beaming from the front row. In that instant, all the trials, the rejection letters' sting, the nights of doubt, the relentless struggle, wove together into a tapestry of triumph. She pressed the microphone to her lips and smiled. Thank you to everyone who believed in us. This journey began with one essay, one act of listening, and one refusal to accept the status quo. But it continues with all of you. Our work is far from over. We will keep forging paths for those whose dreams have been deferred, whose voices have been dismissed, and whose courage has been tested. Together, we are bold and brilliant. The applause thundered, the chandeliers glittered, and William Cavanaugh squeezed her shoulder with pride. Afterwards, in a quiet corner of the ballroom, a young woman approached, a high school senior from the Bronx, with starry eyes and a trembling hand. Clutched in her grip was a letter. Dear Aaliyah, I watched your speech online and felt you were speaking directly to me. You proved that our voices matter and that those in power can be moved by truth. I'm applying for the Bold and Brilliant Scholarship because I believe, like you, that change begins with daring to be heard. Thank you for lighting the way. Sabrina Ortiz, Class of 2026. Aaliyah's throat tightened as she read the words. She folded the letter gently and placed it close to her heart. Turning to Sabrina, she offered a soft nod. Keep writing, she said, and I'll keep listening. In the months and years that followed, Sabrina and hundreds of other students would walk through the doors of Preston University, guided by scholarships that bore Aaliyah's name and vision. Each would find in Aaliyah's story not just inspiration, but a blueprint for perseverance. And though Aaliyah herself would go on to lead national commissions, publish books, and advise world leaders, she never forgot the power of that single page, her original essay, and the moment an assistant read it late one night and decided it was worth sharing. Standing on the threshold of her bright future, Aaliyah Monroe understood that true legacy was not measured by titles or accolades, but by the echoes of empowerment reverberating through classrooms, communities, and hearts. As she stepped forward into the next chapter of her life, she carried with her the certainty that every word she penned, every policy she shaped, and every voice she amplified would ripple outward, sowing seeds of bold and brilliant change for generations to come.